Are you sure it's not Ejiro you're confused with Marilyn?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us from. Chirenda, please, can you hear me, or can anybody hear me?
Yes, Shay, we can. Please go ahead.
All right, thank you all for joining. Let's try to remind those that are here to join to please do well to join us. So while we wait for about few minutes, I would like to oblige that those of us that are here, let's try to take a few seconds to drop our names and our locations in the chat box. Where are you chatting? Where are you joining from? From Nigeria, from Kenya, or where? Let's drop our names and location. Thank you. All right. So while okay, so we'll be starting the session right now. And Chiwendu, please, we have so many people in the lobby. Please help us admit everyone in now. So once again, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining us from. My name is Oluwaseyi Banjo, and today I'll be moderating the session. And on behalf of Sterling One Foundation and our partners, right, I would like to welcome you all to our second ESG webinar series in this year, 2026. Thank you all for taking your time to join us today. And before we join the session, before we start today's session, we had our first session in February, and that was we had the topic from ESG disclosure to strategic action, what organizations must do in 2026. And during that session, we taught how organizations they need to move from just writing reporting to taking real strategic actions and getting the real results and making strong commitments. And today, without taking much of our time, we are going to discuss the topic, the energy transition. Can the transition be just? And we have our professional speakers, and they've been in this field for quite a very long time. And I would need to, at this point, I'd like to introduce Olapeju Ibekwe. She's the CEO of Sterling One Foundation, and she'll be taking us with the opening remarks and welcome address. But before then, Olapeju is the CEO of Sterling One Foundation. She's a business leader and sustainability professional with so many years of experience in social impact and development work. Under her leadership, Sterling One Foundation continues to drive important conversations and partnerships around climate action, health, youth empowerment, gender equality, education, and food security. Also, she has helped build platforms like the Africa Social Impact Summit, yes, which we all know that we have another summit coming up in July next month. And this summit brings leaders together from different sectors to create solutions for Africa. Please join me in welcoming Olapeju Ibekwe. Over to you, Ma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shay. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. It is our pleasure and our honor to host you on the second edition of the Environmental, Social and Governance series in the year 2026. Today, we are highly honored to be bringing this platform to you in partnership with our excellent organizations that have chosen to lead the path for building the knowledge of the ecosystem on ESG. And we're talking about PricewaterhouseCoopers, the NGX Group, the Nigerian Employers Consultative Association. We have Sterling Bank, B Lab Africa, the Lagos Business School Sustainability Center, UNIDO Investment Technology Promotion Office. I must sincerely appreciate all these partners that have chosen to lead the way. Thank you very much. I must also sincerely appreciate our speakers in the room. Excellent experts. I think we are all privileged to have them speak to us today on this very timely topic. None other than Marilyn Obasa and Ejiro Gray. Today, I'm just going to be setting the tone, apart from welcoming you, of course, setting the tone for this conversation. And today we are speaking on the energy transition. Can the transition be just? And this is just going to be for a few minutes. And the conversation is on balancing the growth and continent of Africa and in other country. Now, if you just spend in Nigeria and right action, health, empowerment, gender equality. Transition, simply put, we have had a new way and we're transiting an old way and we're transiting to a new way of providing energy to meet various needs. And of course, we know energy really powers the economy, from vehicles to homes to industries. We need energy. Today, the world is moving away from fossil fuels and is switching to cleaner energy sources. And formerly, we have had, and interestingly, in a unique country like Nigeria, we cannot call that formally because we all still use fossil fuels in one way or another. But this is what we want to transit from, using petrol, diesel, and coal. I think to a large extent, most of us here have transited from firewood use. But yes, there are different communities across the continent of Africa that still use firewood, especially in the hard-to-reach rural communities. We know that the old way usually was able to create jobs and is still creating jobs, right? But it's also creating pollution and increasing the emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And this harm is slowly destroying our planet. We are hoping to transit to a situation where we will maximize sunlight, wind, water, while still creating jobs, of course. But the priority is ensuring that we live in an environment, a planet that we can bestow on the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that, to ensure it is healthy for them. A just transition thus means that we need to do this while ensuring that the jobs that we currently have are protected. The communities are not displaced. Economic growth continues and preferably even expands. We want a situation where we do not increase inequalities because we want to transition. That is what we mean by a just transition. And then the questions we ask ourselves is, really, is that possible? Can Africa really decarbonize and fully transit without deindustrializing? Is that possible? Is it possible for Africa to transit without increasing job loss? Is that even possible? I have a small story this way. I think most of us here, if you are living in Nigeria, you or your neighbors may have been privileged to use a generator at home to provide your own source of power. And of course, I'm sure one way or the other, we might have neighbors, or even in our homes, we might have succeeded in transiting to solar energy. But we have a few questions when it comes to this transitioning. One, who pays for the transition? Who pays for the move from generators to using solar batteries? For those that have done that in the room, I guess you already know that it can be capital intensive in the immediate. So who pays? Especially when we know that there are some poor households in these African and development countries, including Nigeria. Who gets connected first? There's a balance, a type of house structure in Nigeria that is called face me, I face you. In those kinds of homes where it's just a one room apartment of some sort, who really pays? Who gets connected first? What happens to the trained generator mechanic? because there are mechanics that are trained for this purpose. What happens to their jobs? What happens to their families? What happens to their children? What happens to their livelihood? And then the final question, who decided we were switching? Was there a stakeholder engagement at the community level? Or did someone not living in Nigeria or someone in Abuja make that call? Interesting questions. You might agree. But we have a paradox on the continent of Africa. Based on data, Africa contributes little to global emissions, yet Africa suffers disproportionately. Less than 5% is the contribution that the continent makes to global emissions. Yet you find 17 of the world's 20 most vulnerable countries being on this continent of Africa. And of course, we all know that we have floods, we have extreme heat. That is our paradox. Our development reality also is that almost 50%, 40 to 50% of Africans lack electricity access. And but 900 million lack clean cooking access. These are the challenges. In Nigeria, we have over 200 million people today, with a projection of about 400 million by 2050. And about 30 to 40% lack reliable, choice of words, reliable and consistent electricity. These are some of our challenges. You find businesses spending billions annually on self-generation of power. And based on World Bank estimates, power shortages cost Nigeria an estimated $26 billion annually. I dare say that amount could be more. We find that the global transition, while definitely well-meaning, is creating some risks. And what are these risks? Rapid global decarbonization could create stranded assets in a country like Nigeria. Revenue losses, and I'm saying Nigeria because it's an oil-producing country. That's a Nigeria and Algeria, where the oil-producing countries on the continent of Africa. Definitely job displacement, most definitely job displacement, job losses, and fiscal instability. So for Nigeria, we know oil earnings are the major source of earnings for the Nigerian economy. So how do we actually transition in a just manner? Because we're talking about losses of direct and indirect jobs. We have an opportunity, which we call the Africa's Green Advantage. We have huge solar potential. We have significant critical mineral reserves. Of course, Africa is the youngest population, has the youngest population on the across the globe. We have extensive land availability. So these opportunities can be harnessed to make Africa a renewable energy powerhouse, make it a green manufacturing hub, a carbon market leader once we have the structures and the frameworks properly defined and communicated, a green hydrogen exporter, a critical minerals exporter. Yes, we have various reserves, but we are not able at this time, not necessarily leveraging the huge advantage that they bring to bear, because we need to move up the value chain, not just mining and exporting, but the possibilities of mining, processing, manufacturing, then exporting value to the resources that we have. this definitely creates significant number of jobs in the different countries where these reserves exist, and hundreds of billions of dollars in additional economic value. The other opportunity that we have is the huge workforce. But a huge workforce, young population, can be a demerit if not properly skilled to be able to deliver on the economic realities. And so it just transition has to be designed to be able to create more jobs rather than destroying um, um, the potential that the youth have. And we're talking about across different subsectors from the solar transition to clean energy, solar e-mobility, climate smart agriculture, circular economic clean cooking. And I must commend the various organizations already investing in this, but there's a lot to be done. I think the biggest bottleneck is financing. And we currently have almost $300 billion needed annually by 2030 to be able to close the climate finance gap to, to ensure that this transition can be just. Today we have less than 10% of the requirement. Um, with this is what I believe I have able to set the tone for our conversation today to let us know what this just transition really means, what are the different implications, how it plays up on the continent of Africa and in Nigeria, and the fact that finance is a major bottleneck. Um, and we know that the different job skills that we used to use or we're currently using in a country like Nigeria, we're still translating. Some of them might get lost and we can create more unemployment, but there's an opportunity that can be harnessed. Today, I would like to, and these are my final words for what organizations can do high level. Our expert speakers in the house will go in depth or on some of these points. The first one is a self-assessment, self-awareness. How much energy is your organization using today? Where does it come from? And if you transit today, who are those that will be affected? Please take stock to them and create means. Make a real promise, set targets. Make sure that these targets are they protect people rather than expose people, not just reducing your carbon footprint on paper. Number three, put your money where your mouth is. Invest in the transition in your organization, retrain the staff, and also invest in ensuring that the communities and the skill set that are required to ensure that people are not left to be out in the streets where you find that their skills are useless in the new world. Please make those investments and tell the truth publicly. Ensure that your reports are holistic, not just about putting down the emissions reduced, but also the jobs created and the lives changed. And then make it a point of duty to update your goals year on year. I will stop there for now. And I'll allow my wonderful experts in the room to take this forward. I will just round up with an invitation for the Africa Social Impact Summit, which is being co-convened by the United Nations, Nigeria, the Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning. And the theme is financing for development, building resilience, and transforming emerging economies. I must also mention that there is an opportunity to get an international certification on international grantsmanship and ESG, a partnership with the Lancaster University. The details of this will be shared with you via email, and if interested, you can be a part of it. It's going to be a hybrid, and it's going to be providing 2 certificates, with the final sessions happening on the sidelines of the Africa Social Impact Summit in July. Thank you again for joining us. Put on your seatbelt and let us take this session to the next level. Thank you, Sheyi. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Peju. It was quite an insightful session. And thank you for the opening remarks, as well as setting the tone for today's session. So next, to help us set today's context properly and hearing from our professional speakers, right? Please permit me to welcome Mrs. Marilyn Obasia Osuala. She is the partner and head of ESG, Sustainability and Climate Change Services at PwC in Nigeria. She has over 18 years of experience working across sustainability, climate, finance, ESG strategy, and development projects in sectors including energy, banking, agriculture, and the public sector. Today, she's going to help us understand the Nigeria's energy transition journey and the important justice issues connected to it. Please join me in welcoming Mrs. Marilyn. Over to you, Ma. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sterling One, for having me. And I'm glad to be speaking to this very distinguished audience. I'm also acknowledging my co-speaker, Ejiro Gray, who will be coming on after me. And Peju, thank you also for setting the context. I always say that the CEO of Sterling One always has a way of, calling us into action, gradually in terms of, upskilling, and then of course, supporting with implementation. And I'm sure you saw that comes through in her presentation. So today we'll be talking about this thing called just energy. I'm quite passionate about the stories that is told on the continent with regards to just energy transition. Are we saying the right story? And what should we be looking at as a continent? So I had picked Nigeria as a case study. I'm sure most of the experiences in Nigeria is also seen across other African countries, like I've been to and I've spoken to across Africa as I do my work. One of the things you would understand is that we need to first define what just energy transition means, not just as a general definition, which we all know, but what does it really mean to say energy transition is just? Or what does energy transition mean? So energy transition is that shift we make towards the low carbon economy. But when we then got to a discussion at one of the UN conferences that is put together every year, COP, that we all know about, there had been very strong discussion around putting that word just in the transition, which means that we're looking at how we would protect livelihood, expand energy access, support inclusion, and create shared prosperity. And so when you hear about just energy transition, it affects you, it affects us, it affects everyone on the continent. And how you translate this to you as individuals or to your different organization is very, very important. And that's why we are here today. So it means expanding access to affordable and reliable energy. I'm going to be talking to you about the different areas where Ejiro would, she is an energy expert in sustainability, so she would come and then take it a lot further. It's about creating jobs and new economic opportunities. So now we have what we call the green jobs, right? And not just are we asking for more access, we are saying that even if the fossil fuels had created energy that has industrialized probably the West, like the argument is, and they're stopping us from industrializing. What has that industrialization really done? Has it really been inclusive? Has there been global inclusiveness, or have we had more poverty, or what are the trickling effects that have happened, or the impacts of that? And so that's what the just energy transition is coming into, to say, let's make this just, equitable, accessible. Are we really protecting workers and vulnerable communities? And if you look at how that sector grew, we now have a lot of vulnerable communities. I mean, if you don't know what we're talking about, all we just need to show you is a video of our Niger Delta and how it looks like at the moment, or other communities in other countries where this was not, things around social inclusion, community development, environment was not really escalated as it should, or was not really taken seriously. Even if there were lip services paid to it. Reducing inequality. I know that some people will say, oh, with transitioning, there's still inequality because the cost of acquiring XYZ of energy is high, but we will get to that in further. And then you see long-term resilience and sustainable development. Next, moving on. We then see that understanding transition is not about the argument on the global front, where it's either a political interest or we are complaining as victims. No, it's asking ourselves, what are our costs and what are our benefits? Because whether we like it or not, that transition is already happening. I call it a parallel transitioning for Africa, where we have what we call the brown economy, where is the fossil fuel economy, running pari passu with the transitioning of the green. We also have in between that what we call a transition product to a transition gas product, which is gas, which we're also using, and all sorts of energy being accessed. The question for Africa is, how are we doing this mix to create economic benefit, to create sustainable development? We have to expand our energy access. Are we thinking about putting the brown economy on heavy manufacturing industries and putting, the green economy, which is solar, EV cars, etc., on households? We have no excuse as Africa now that there are multiple sources of energy that we can use. Are we creating jobs? There are two different caps of goals. You will see the development goals, and then you'll see the climate goals. While we have held on strongly to climate goals to say, oh, where should we be reducing emissions? We don't have this, we don't have that, we don't have this, we don't have that in Africa. What this transition is telling us is that we will be missing out on a lot of opportunities if that's all we are focusing on. We cannot also look at those effects of us not looking at the emission reduction, especially for our environment, as we are already experiencing those extreme climate situations, from flooding to extreme heat. In fact, I went to a village, and one of the village heads told me that what I'm seeing now, the heat is experiencing now, is because we've forgotten that trees had a place in our lives. But now they have to now restructure in the village to say to them, what are the trees that we shouldn't touch? Of course, excluding their ancestral trees that they use for their ancestral worship. Are there any other trees that we should keep? That's some of the discussions that are happening, even at a very low scale level that, is not being discussed. So there are so many issues around transition that we need to look at. So, energy transition is actually an economic decision. It is an economic decision. It's a transformation decision. And far above just being a climate agenda, it's also a transformation agenda for Africa as we go on. Move on, please. If you look at the 17 SDGs, SDG 7 is really at the center of development, if you think about it. And you can see there, it's written affordable and clean energy. And SDG is saying, we're not saying transition to forget decent work and economic growth. You can see it's there as SDG 8, or transforming to forget industry, innovation, and infrastructure, or responsible consumption, or, clean water and etc. You will see how energy drives everything. And so it's important for us as an organization to ask ourselves, what are our energy sources? What are our energy mix? If you're looking at it from the macroeconomic perspective, as a country, you know that you don't have a choice. If there's anything anybody is asking for in all African countries, that access to energy, enough energy to be able to industrialize as well, enough energy to be able to live comfortably, enough energy to be able to have good education for our children, good health systems, etc. It's what we are talking about. Next slide. Moving on, you would then ask us, what are these opportunities for us, in the continent or in our various organizations if we ignore the just energy transition? I'll crack a joke. Even if you ignore it, and even if a government ignores it or you ignore it in your organization, an example of solar energy would continue to grow in innovation. And just don't forget that while you can disturb the flow of fossil fuel products through what we call the Strait of Hormuz, which all of us know about now, there is no Strait of Hormuz, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, when it comes to the sun. Are you going to put a canopy across the sun to say no access? So you will see that solar energy is going to give maximum access. All that needs to happen is one innovation crystallizing to make mass production and easier availability of this. And it's already happening. Yeah, there are children, there are young kids who are already producing solar panels. And all the side effects of the battery will be worked on. And in the next, as I tell some people, in the next 5 years, we'll be having things like I better pass you, I better pass my neighbor solar panels, I better pass my neighbor solar batteries. And for those of you who don't understand what I'm saying, it's a slang in Nigeria where we say, when we use our generator, there's a particular generator that is called I better pass my neighbor. But now, no one is going to look at that. The most fundamental shift that I've seen is in the EV cars. And you can see the risks and opportunities that have been listed here. And I think some of them have been discussed by Pedro when she spoke. And of course, we'll be sharing the deck. Next slide. If you look at one of the most fundamental shifts I've seen, next slide, please. One of the most fundamental shifts I've seen, I needed to go to the slide where there are the EV cars and all that. Then I'll go back to slide 6. Yeah. One of the most fundamental shift I've seen now is on electric vehicles. No, I remember 3 years ago, people used to laugh at those things. I remember the first Tesla I saw in Nigeria, people who used to laugh and say this one will stop on the way. I remember, whether it was 3 years or 4 years ago, today, a prominent Nigerian was seen driving an EV car, and the whole social media scattered and said, wow. Look, you cannot, when innovation comes, just like, just like the iPhones and the Androids have pushed away, BlackBerry into other businesses, or even out of the another phone devices into out of the market. You cannot ignore innovation, provided it's affordable, it's accessible. You will get a lot of patronage. And if people prefer it, there's a general preference, just like iPhone is not cheap, but there's a general preference for iPhone. You can't stop that. You can't control human preferences, no matter how you try. If that's what happened, that's what will happen. Please take us 2 slides back, and I'll be concluding very shortly. So, fine. So, what are the opportunities there? you know, like I said, Kweju kind of explained some of that. I do not want to repeat what she's already said. We have to finance transition. So from our Ministry of Finance to our central banks, to the banks and financing and the finance sector, bank and non-banking sectors, you have to begin to look at how do you finance this transition? The transition in Africa, as I see, I call it parallel transition. We're transiting from, there's a fossil fuel going, there's also the EV cars and the green economy growing, and also the blue economy, which is your hydroelectricity, etc. These three, they will continue to play a key factor in our energy. And as we grow in population, in our energy requirements, energy supplies, as we grow. So where do you play? Where do you want to play? So we need to attract capital. So they have to finance this transition. Inclusion must be central. Inclusion must be central. Inclusion drives new business opportunities. And I don't want to call the name of the company, but I know that some of you know that there's a bank right now, or there are two banks, microfinance banks right now, that there's no artisan that is not their customers. And those banks grew on inclusion. They grew on the concept of inclusion. And that's why I say the concept of, you know, the transition will grow. Energy transition will grow no matter the interest on the international front, because there's a drive for inclusion well embedded inside of it. You can see the war today, you know, with Iran and the US and Israel has shown how relying on one source of energy can cause a massive trouble in the world and massive exclusion. We are all feeling the impact. So just know that this is going to happen. So there's going to be policy-driven transition. There's going to be finance, then technology. AI is based on a very, very intense use of power. And if AI is going to grow, the just energy transition will grow, because it will require a lot of energy access, which we'll need to use, whether it's even energy access to cooling systems. There's a lot of technology and innovation ongoing as AI expands. We, here in this country, without AI expanding to our rural areas, we still have an energy shortage, not to talk of when we imbibe AI massively as a continent. The energy requirements will be massive. I don't have data to that. I kind of search, but I think if we find, I'm going to add it to the deck, and so that you will see the massive energy requirement that is coming on the globe. So please don't be scared. There's still going to be a better path to your neighbor solar energy. I'm sure some people in this room are already thinking of how to go and produce that in China already. So this is going to happen. Absolutely, yes. I see people laughing in the chat room. Now, so I spoke about this parallel move for energy access, so water-linked energy and all that. We try to keep moving. There's now things like a lamp that salt water can power for 24 hours. All you need to do is to put a number of, just go to either the beach and get water, or you do your salt water yourself, put it in the lamp, it lamps up. You don't need to go to anybody, and it's free. So, so we need to begin to think through very clearly. Now, is Africa as a disadvantage? I bet to disagree. I don't care what the debates are. We are not at a disadvantage. Why? We possess, Africa is known as the sun continent. When you look for sun, you come to Africa. Africa has good water body. So we need to begin to challenge the status quo and challenge our governments, challenge ourselves to what kinds of business and infrastructure projects do we want in Africa. Africa has rare earth metals and the critical metals for transition, from lithium, etc. We just need to ask ourselves, what do we really want to do? Do we have the human resource to produce solar panel and different types of panel? Of course, we do have that, and it's already happening as I speak in many continents. Move on, please. Africa has all to transit, so if the resource is there and human knowledge is there that this can give me energy, and I don't see anybody that's going to stop that, right? So we need to ask ourselves those questions. So the true measure of a successful energy transition is not how quickly we reduce emissions. Yes, we want to reduce emissions. It's very critical for us to do that. But, Page even said, in Africa, we're not even emitting as much as, the global north. But even as we are not emitting, we still have to take care of our environment. But that's not our topic of discussion today. But what else we're saying is, yes, it's not how quickly we actually reduce emission, but how effectively we improve the lives while doing it. How we're able to, like sustainability definition is, improve our lives today without compromising the opportunities of our future generation to live comfortably, to live their own life, and of course, to continue to sustain life. That's the essence. And so if we keep on looking at things in that perspective, we're going to ask ourselves better and critical questions when we talk about just energy transition. It will move away from saying, oh, Africa is at a disadvantage, to saying, what are our costs, what are our benefits, and are we really harnessing these benefits and mitigating whatever risks that we see in the foreseeable future. Moving on. Thank you so much for this time to say this. And this is just to set context. Of course, we'll go into question and answer. And Ejiro will coming from the energy perspective to give us depth into what are these opportunities for us to harness. Thank you. And over to you, Ejiro.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, for setting the tone, and to Peju as well for giving an intro as to what we're going to be discussing. So over the next few minutes, we'll go over this issue of the energy transition, which, by the way, I find very interesting because it's so multifaceted, it's so multidimensional, and honestly, I don't think there's a silver bullet to it. I think there's so many considerations, and if we're thinking in that mode of bringing different aspects and perspectives together, I think we'll have a better and more holistic way forward than just holding on to one narrative. So please, Sheyi, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So as we go into it, disclaimer, or would I say warning, right? I work with Sahara Group. It's a fully integrated energy company. We do operate in the fossil fuel space, right? And we are, like I said, an integrated energy company. So we're in oil and gas, we're in power as well. So I do have diverse perspectives to this topic. It might look like I'm advocating for oil and gas, but that's not really the case. I must be honest with you. I'm simply looking at it from the lens of what I understand to be the real constraints in some of these issues, which I find that a majority of the general public and populace don't really understand. Next slide, please. Okay. So what is Nigeria's energy transition, and what are the development objectives? Like what it is, what it promises, and what it must deliver. Beg your pardon. Next slide. I think you've gone down, so you need to go back up. Yes, thank you. Okay, so where did it start actually? The energy transition actually started at a conversation in 2021 in Glasgow at the COP26, which is a conference of parties, right? So it's the annual climate conference that is hosted by a subset of the United Nations. And there, the former late President Muhammadu Buhari pledged that Nigeria would commit to achieving net zero by 2060. Now, in August 2022, Nigeria launched the Energy Transition Plan. And this was championed by the former vice president at the time, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, right? And it was designed as a strategy for significant low carbon development of our energy systems across 5 key sectors. that we will go into. Now, as of 2024, the ETP, which is the Energy Transition Plan, short for it, was updated to incorporate recent data and policy developments, right, following sector-specific consultations with key stakeholders. Next slide, please. Okay, so what are these 5 sectors, right? There's power, there's oil and gas, there's industry, so we're talking about manufacturing and all of that, transport, and cooking. Now with transport, it's sort of linked to oil and gas, right? Because of course, the reason why it's a focus area is because of the fuel that is used, which of course is derived from oil and gas. So with power, the goal is to achieve emissions decrease or reduction by approximately 100% as solar increases and starts to replace gas in its role as a transition fuel, right? Thereby creating a shift away from typical diesel and petrol generators and those other sources of energy. Now with oil and gas, the goal is to achieve approximately 87% reduction, which should be driven by declining global demand, as well as reduced flaring, in fact, eliminated flaring, I'd say, and improved electrification and energy efficiency in our exploration and production activities in that sector. Now, with industry, it's about achieving at least 97% reduction in emissions in industry, in manufacturing, due to decarbonization efforts. That should be the driver, right? Especially in the area of cement production, cement and ammonia, right? So that we're able to move and shift to zero emissions. Reason being that cement is actually a major source of emissions in the sector, in the economy actually. So transport, the goal is also to achieve at least 97%, with the driver being the uptake of EVs, right, in both passenger and public transportation segments. And then, of course, with cooking, which really is clean cooking, it's to ensure that we get to about 98% based on that shift away from traditional fuels like firewood, charcoal, kerosene, to LPG in the short term, which is liquefied petroleum gas, and then biogas, electric cooking as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is the development mandate? Why are we doing all of this? What are the objectives, right? The aim is to ensure that we have at least 100 million Nigerians lifted out of poverty. We create new jobs of about 340,000 by 2030. And then the net new jobs by 2060, estimated to be about 840,000. And of course, our net zero target here of 2060. So by lifting Nigerians out of poverty, how do we intend to achieve this? Improve energy access for millions of Nigerians. Currently, we have about 92 million Nigerians without access to energy. You would agree with me, that's a very significant number. And of course, new jobs, so job preservation, poverty reduction, and then of course, sustainable transition with the net zero target. Next slide, please. Thank you. But what is the financing reality? What is the cost? Like Marilyn pointed out, we need to assess the cost of getting to where we need to be or where we want to be, right? Investment opportunity that has been identified by the Nigeria Energy Transition Office is about $23 billion US, right? And it's estimated that the funding required through the private sector is estimated at about $17 billion US, right? And also the amount of fuel saving demonstrating significant economic and environmental benefits would be about $686 billion. But what does this really mean, right, to us, to the Nigerians? We require approximately $500 billion spending on capital investments to achieve net zero by 2060, starting from 2024. So we're like 2 years, behind, I'd say, what the target is, right? So this means that, of course, it's expected that private sector really needs to buckle up and help Nigeria achieve that goal especially leveraging those 5 areas earlier mentioned, right, to achieve this net zero goal of 2060. Next slide, please. Okay, so what does this mean for the energy sector? Right, next slide. What does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for communities? Now, the thing about it is, energy access is not just a developmental goal, right? Energy access is the goal for the growth of our economy. As Nigerians, as Africans, right? It's necessary for socioeconomic development. It is the driver for employment, for entrepreneurship, right? For industrialization, for manufacturing, for all of those things. And I'll tell you why. About 48% of SMEs contribute to Nigeria's GDP. Now, in a country where they're struggling, right, with energy access, where energy takes up a very significant portion, about 60% of their production cost, right, of the cost of doing business, it becomes worrying because it then starts to stifle their capacity to grow and scale their businesses, right? And the thing about it is, with SMEs, they're such a critical economic driver because any serious economy must be growing their SMEs. They must create an enabling environment for their SMEs to thrive because they're a significant employer of labor in any economy. The government's role is not to create jobs, it's to create an enabling environment that allows employers, right, establish businesses that can then employ other people. And it starts with the SMEs and then the mid-sized businesses and then the larger businesses. Now, when you talk about the larger businesses, whether it's in the oil and gas or telecoms or whatever sector, there's only so much or so many people that can be hired by the sectors. That's the reality. And so you are relying on these entrepreneurs, these businesses, these startups to then help to fill the gap. But of course, the environment must be right, right? So if you have a situation of 84% of Nigeria's workforce employed by SMEs, then you can imagine the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing if SMEs are not able to thrive and grow. Now, you have SME expenditure on power alone, at least 40%. In a lot of cases, it's over 60%, right? And that was why at some point we also saw a shift, not even just of SMEs, because for the SMEs, there was so much they could do in terms of relocating, but you had international companies, multinational companies in manufacturing that were once in Nigeria, then shifting the manufacturing base to other countries because the cost of energy, the cost of doing business was not favorable, right? Now, look at power outages, at least 32 to 33 power outages occur per month on average for firms. Now, the thing is, for a lot of these manufacturing firms, a lot of these businesses, they cannot afford to have their flow of operations, their manufacturing processes and machines interrupted frequently by these power cuts. And so you will find that some of them have to then completely go off grid and then just focus on either a gas generator or some other kind of generator to ensure that there's an uninterrupted flow in their operations. So when you think about it, when energy fails, industry leaves. When energy fails, manufacturing stops. There's a lot of talent in Nigeria. We have a very high youth demography, over 70%. But we're not really able to leverage that because there are severe constraints in the business environment, especially because of the energy situation. So think of companies like Dunlop and Michelin, who relocated out of Nigeria, right? So they basically took the jobs here and went to create it elsewhere in a more favorable environment in that sense, right? Say power on reliability cost firms an estimated 11% of annual sales value, right? Per annum. That's scary. And like I said earlier, the SMEs bear the heaviest burden. And so if we really want to drive growth, economic growth, socioeconomic development, we need to address this issue. There's a reason why I'm saying all of this. Next slide, please. Okay. The reason I say this, I recall seeing on Marilyn's slide, there was a statement that was made on that slide that I found very interesting and so true. It said, oil developed Nigeria, but did it include Nigeria? That's the salient question that, if you think about it, is at the base and is the underlying issue here, right? We're at a point and at a place in our development where, honestly, we have not really enjoyed the full benefit of our own resources. And when I say we, I'm talking about the ordinary Joe Blogs on the street, the common man, right? Yes, there have been benefits enjoyed by a few, undoubtedly, but we have not established the systems that ensure that we're generating more value along the chain in continent, in country, right? Now, the truth is, because of how critical the fossil fuels and the energy sector is, you then find that we've had situations, right, especially once there's a war, once there's some kind of unrest, global issues, where we then have to pause and say, okay, you know what, the transition is going on quite all right, but we may need to revisit some of our original energy sources, like coal, like oil and gas, not because we need to stop the transition or we need to move away from it. No, but because the energy demand, right, cannot currently be sufficiently met by these other resources at the stage of their development currently. That's not to say that they don't have the potential, right, to completely displace oil and gas or fossil fuels, but it's to say that pragmatism is the name of the game. So it's not about let's displace one for another. It's about what is the optimal mix that we need to achieve our goals as a country, as a continent. So when we talk about this just energy transition, we're looking beyond just, are we creating jobs for people? Well, that is critical, but does it actually aid these countries? Does it actually help these countries? Especially African countries, especially developing countries. So what does this mean for us as Africa and as Nigeria, right? If developed nations have to return to coal when energy security demands it, it's because they understand that energy is the very foundation of everything else. And, when we even talk about fossil fuels, oil and gas and all of that, let's also remember that it goes far beyond fuel, beyond power. These resources are used for the manufacturing of so many things that we use in our everyday lives, right? So when we think about it, let's not just think about petrol, diesel, aviation fuel, kerosene. No, it goes far beyond that. It's used in manufacturing of so many different materials, so many things that we're yet to find adequate replacements for. So I think we need to balance our view of what needs to be done, how we need these resources, what we do with these resources, right? So the just transition for Africa, for Nigeria, is one that would allow us to effectively leverage multiple energy sources, because our priority is to ensure energy access to all that will drive development, drive growth, drive prosperity. Then it becomes easier to navigate the other things. We often talk about how we're the lowest emitters, right? The African continent, yet we're the most vulnerable. The reason is simple. It's because we don't have the level of infrastructure and maintenance that is required to adapt to climate shocks. So when it comes, it hits us, and it hits us badly. The increased rainfall with the flooding and all of that, a lot of it is because we don't have the right infrastructure, the right drainage, the right, all of that, the trees that we've completely taken off. We just build, no trees, no consideration of nature in our development process, in our urban and regional planning. Those are some of the main contributors to our vulnerability. And to address that, we must judiciously use our resources and channel our resources in the right direction. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. So please, can you go back? One slide. Okay. So energy transition should not mean immediately eradicating fossil fuels before closing the energy access gap. It doesn't mean sacrificing economic growth and socioeconomic development. It's not about, being an automatic displacement for a sector. And it's not about achieving carbon reduction without providing access to energy, right? What it should really mean for us is optimizing our energy mix. So gradually optimizing the energy mix to more sustainable forms, like gas as a transition fuel, then renewables, clean cooking, grid expansion. And these things are not mutually exclusive. They can actually happen simultaneously, because that's what we need. If we're dealing with 92 million people without access to energy, then you know that the size and the magnitude of the problem is enough to accommodate different and diverse energy sources. The energy transition should also mean reskilling for oil and gas workers, first based on gas. So reskill them to know how to optimize and commercialize and monetize the use of gas, right, as a transition fuel. And then also creating new jobs and green skills for the informal sector and the unemployed, especially those that operate downstream the value chain, as Peju had said in her intro about, the generator technician who only knows how to operate diesel generators or petrol generators, right? What are we doing for those people? Because the informal sector is such a significant part of our economy and a significant contributor to our economy and to employment, that we cannot afford to leave them behind. We cannot afford to treat them as a liability, but rather a critical stakeholder in the transition. Then we should also measure the success of the transition for Africa, for Nigeria, based on socioeconomic growth linked to GDP per capita. That should be our primary measure of success. So whatever strategies we're deploying to that, we should be able to see the positive impacts on socioeconomic growth and GDP per capita. And then, of course, we must strengthen our human capital development. So your universities, polytechnics, technical colleges, vocational colleges, what are they learning? Is their curriculum being adapted and aligned to meet future needs and the trajectory of energy and fuel and all of these things, right? Or are we still dealing with old needs and old conditions and old, sources? So at the end of the day, it's not about which energy source wins. It's not a moralistic debate as to, which one is better, which one should we drop and favor the other. But the question is, what combination will get us to our goal of reliable and affordable energy where it is lacking in the cleanest possible way and in the fastest possible way? Next slide, please. Okay, please go on. Okay, I think we've dealt with all of this. Next slide. Okay, we've talked about this, the scale of the gap. Please, next slide. Yes. So I thought to also mention, what is Sahara doing in the gas space? Because we've accepted that, gas is a transition fuel, even whilst we leverage solar, for instance, green hydrogen and all of that for our development. Now, let's understand that one of the things that is a very big driver for the uptake of solar and renewable energy in this part of the world is not just environmental awareness and consciousness, but the main driver is actually affordability and just access to energy. People just want light. That's the truth. People just want light. And so if you bring another technology today different from solar that will give them that access they desire at an affordable price, they will take it. And that's why we need to optimize this mix. So in our own little corner as Sahara Group, what are we doing? Take, for instance, in our communities, our host communities, of course, with the oil and gas operations, you had a situation of gas flaring. And of course, we have a goal to phase out that gas flaring by 2030 completely latest. And one of the things we did in the interim was to ensure that we can divert some of that flared gas into generating power for our host communities. So we do have host communities in Nigeria today, in the Niger Delta, that have 24/7 power supply because of initiatives like this. One of them is our Joki community. And we're spreading that to Ajami-Mora community as well. Another thing we're doing is gas commercialization, ensuring that from our producing assets, we're able to redirect that gas as well as flared gas towards industry, manufacturing, power companies, gas-fired power plants, right, in the area and, wherever it is needed. But of course, that also takes infrastructure. So pipelines, for instance, that is something that we're keenly working on to ensure that that gap is closed. Now, of course, with gas and all of that, there comes logistics, because we're not just concerned about Nigeria alone. It's an African thing. It's an African challenge that we're trying to address. And so we have currently 6 LPG vessels, right, that trade across Africa, Europe, and Asia. And we also have 2 currently under construction, right? And we're also setting up storage. So for instance, we have storage in Cote d'Ivoire that ensures that Cote d'Ivoire, for instance, has adequate supply, but also the neighboring landlocked countries like Mali, right, are also catered to. We're developing that as well in Nigeria. We already have some capacity, but we're developing and making it larger in Nigeria, in Tanzania and Ghana, as well as Kenya, right? So these are like priorities for us to ensure that the African continent is able to leverage the resources we have in whatever form and create value on the continent rather than just exporting out of the continent. Next slide, please. Okay, so just very quickly, because I understand we need to go into discussions now. Very quickly, what must change in order to create a truly just transition and have just outcomes? Number one is we need to broaden our workforce development, right? So reskilling, especially considering women, youth, and communities that are outside of the formal sector. So that's primary. Then energy access as a primary justice metric, because like I said, you must measure the impact of that transition and the solutions or the strategy of the transition on socioeconomic development, on GDP per capita, right? Thirdly, we must institutionalize community voice. The people most affected, the people most vulnerable must always be consulted. They must be seen as critical stakeholders in this journey so that we're not creating solutions outside of their reality, which when you then try to implement, you then realize it actually doesn't address their problems. And then fourthly, we must make restorative commitments concrete. So currently we have things like the Host Community Development Trust, right, for the Niger Delta communities. We must ensure that the funds that are being deployed to that trust are transparently utilized to not only fund remediation, but also develop projects that would drive measurable outcomes, that would drive economic diversity and diversification for those regions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, just a quick touch on Sahara's energy transition strategies. So of course, I talked about our energy access provision, right? Drive for gas to power. And then of course, even in-house within the business, we're also looking at different ways of also managing our own energy efficiency. So deploying solar even to our own facilities. We also recently, in the last 2 years, deployed wind turbines to our Egbe facility to see how that source of energy can also perform in this environment and see if it's a worthy investment, right? And of course, we talked about the Ajoki community and the deployment of flared gas to creating power for them. And then, of course, nature-based solutions. We talked about how we've forgotten nature in our development and aspirations. And it's so critical for our adaptation to climate change. It's so critical for the energy transition. And so that's something that we're heavily invested in, not just in Nigeria, but across Africa. We've adopted almost 100 hectares of degraded forest land, right, across Africa. We work directly with forest agencies in different African countries to do this so that we can easily measure our impact, and we're sure that we're deploying our resources in the right way, and it's being clearly monitored. Also, business diversification portfolio. We're ensuring that we also become a leading LPG player, right, for clean cooking, for industrialization, for all of that in the midterm, right? Of course, reduction of our operational carbon footprint. That's something that we're measuring. We also have aligned with Nigeria on our net zero goals. One of the things we plan to do, of course, is achieve routine flaring, termination of routine flaring before 2030, right? And achieve carbon neutrality also ahead of that by 2027. We also are looking to reduce our emissions year on year by at least 5% annually, right? And in order to achieve our net zero goals by 2060. And we have strategies to do this. Of course, we're looking at decarbonization mechanisms, even in our operations currently. So for instance, in the power sector, would it be possible to capture the emissions, your CO2 emissions, and deploy it into a raw material for manufacturing, say graphite, things like that. It has worked in coal power plants, and we're looking to see if that can also be effective for gas-fired power plants. And then, of course, adoption of climate-focused ESG considerations. That's very key for us. One of the things that we started doing is our own climate risk assessment. What is the impact of our business on climate change? What is the impact of climate change on our business? How do we mitigate these things? This is something we're doing across our businesses as well. Last slide, please. Thank you very much for your time and your patience. Over to you now, Marilyn.
Thank you. I did say that you're going to take us deep into the reality of Nigeria, and you took us through that journey. And thank you so much. Interesting things that Sarah is doing as well. Please confirm you can hear me and you can see
Yes,
me.
I can hear you. Yes, I can see you.
So, and interesting things, Sarah is doing as well. There's a question on the chat box. We can start with that before we go into our conversation. Ejiro, because Ejiro and I are just going to have a conversation, and then we'll be taking your questions at the same time on this particular topic. So I'm going to ask Ejiro a few questions. A lot of them she's answered in her presentation, but we would also look at it in view of the questions we'll see in the chat box. I think the first I have seen is the question around just transition. And it was a really long comment that the person had written. If we can all go to our chat box, it talks about, when we talk about energy transition in Nigeria, we overlook a lot of issues, and there are so many. It said, first, can renewables power industrialization, and how do we take care of the energy intensive sectors like steel? So Ejiro, we'll be talking about that. I think you did mention that in your presentation, but let me let you answer that question, and then I move on to the second because it's quite power-packed.
Okay, so this is actually the reason why I said the goal is an optimal mix, because the reality is there are some sectors that would do better with gas as a source of fuel, for instance, like you said, like steel, like certain aspects of manufacturing, than with renewable energy as is. Now, that's not to say that the technology for renewable energy will not develop further, like Marilyn said, within the next 5 years, so that it's able to address more as a large scale energy uses. But I would say because of the rate of, I'd say, development needs that we have, because of the scale of development that needs to happen for us as a country and as a continent within the next 5 to 10 years as well, it's important that we're deploying different sources to suit that particular sector. So for steel manufacturing, for heavy users of energy, heavy consumers of energy, it's better you use a fuel source or an energy source that works well to attain the level of productivity and development that is required for that sector.
Yeah, and the recommended one will be gas, which we also have in abundance. Yes, the recommended one will be gas. Yes, if you're looking at this from, and then, the question also then gave us some recommendation to say, I believe that our renewable energy strategy should focus on hard to reach communities that do not have electricity and SMEs. And that's for sure. If you remember, I did speak about it as well, to say we need to come up with our strategy as a country, which I'm sure some of our policymakers are in the room. or as a continent, where we are saying, are we going to concentrate our green growth on communities and households, and then our transition growth, such as gas and as the case may be, on the high energy intensive sector? So yes.
So I do think that, yes, I think that it's necessary that we do that. So deploy
Absolutely.
renewable energy for now to underserved and unserved areas, right? And households as well. And then
Yes.
as the technology improves and scales up, then you can start to replace your conventional or traditional sources with renewable energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, the second question is the geopolitics of politics again, Africa and politics, the world and politics. Yeah. So the geopolitics of energy transition is often not talked about. China produces huge amount of energy from renewables. However, over 50% of the new local power plants in the world are being built in China. My point is we have to be smart about energy transition. Yeah, so thank you for that. We agree. I think that's the emphasis today, even in Ejiro's presentation, showing what Sahara is doing. We do agree that, yeah, we need to be very strategic. And that's the kind of conversation we expect on the planet. And of course, in Africa specifically. That's what we're saying. What are our benefits, our costs? How are we mitigating our risks as well in the view of the global politics as well? So that's correct. Ejiro, I'm just validating the comments, and then I'll go to the questions. Yeah. So whilst Nigeria has been a key supplier of critical minerals such as lithium and all that, the question is, we are laden with social issues, and I think I'll let you answer that questions. And those questions, why do we have to take that brunt of social issues? That is it fair to allow countries like Nigeria, DRC, Zimbabwe, etc., bear the negative impact of environment and social issues that come with mining and the energy transition? Does this energy transition then become just if it still also comes up with its own social issues? I think that's the main question in that space.
So I agree with you. I agree with the commenter. Is it really just if we're plagued with socio-economic issues and the environmental issues that come with this transition and the use of this critical rare earth minerals? Now, the thing is, whilst I agree that it's not so just, I think the onus is on us to determine and dictate how we want this transition to play out. The fact that these environmental issues plaguing the DRC, Zimbabwe, all these places exist is because when you ask the question, what are these governments also doing to protect the rights of their citizens and of the people and of these assets in their countries? It's important that they're being, intentional about the standards, environmental standards, the social standards, right? Because what has a major problem that has been for Africa is this extractive mode of development or use of our minerals. So we just extract from the ground and then we ship it out, right? Or we allow them ship it off without creating value, which is why the impact is not being felt on the citizenry, which is why it's a case of oil-developed Nigeria. I would even put that developed quote and unquote because the Nigeria didn't develop. But then the question is, but did it include Nigeria? No, because it was an extractivist model. Take it out of the ground and ship it off. And if you look at it, sadly, even Africa, if you look at our trade routes, if you look at our sea routes, all of them are designed to take things out of Africa, not share things within Africa. So we need to look at all of those things and redesign our own trade routes, redesign our own infrastructure setup, because it wasn't set up for our benefit. It was set up for the benefit of the global north.
Yeah, absolutely. So people say that the concept of just transition was largely designed by the global north. I disagree. I think the concept of just came up from the argument of the developing countries saying, how is this just for us? Yeah, that we are transiting. Okay, so having looked at that, is there a framework that you think we can use as fit for purpose? I think this question is already overflowed. What is the framework that we can use, as a continent to say, yes, this would largely work for us? Because once we talk about that on the macro perspective, getting an energy mix for all industries will be very easy if the focus on the macro is correct, right? So what do you think is that framework? We have the ETP already, but what exactly is that framework over and above our energy transition plans that we can look at high level?
Okay. So I think the framework has to be how we define justice for us, right? Like you had rightly mentioned, it's not the rate at which you displace one form of energy for another, but the rate at which whatever strategy we're using for the just energy transition eradicates energy poverty, builds local industrial capacity, and secures economic dignity, especially for its informal workforce, for our informal workforce, right? So it needs to be fit for purpose for Nigeria. For the global north, it was just about an energy transition. Yes, you're right. The developing countries then put in the question of being just, being inclusive, right? And so we cannot go with the original blueprints. That's the reality, right? I like to think of it as a GPS in a vehicle, right? So you have the GPS that is in your vehicle and you can program it to say, I need to get to this destination, right? Give me the shortest routes where there's no traffic hold up, all of those things. But the GPS does not dictate how you get there. It can advise you, right? But it doesn't dictate. You, the driver, determine how you get there. You can decide to ignore the GPS. You can decide to follow it. If it's not working at some point, you can, make it recalculate and take you elsewhere. Now, the global north has defined what an energy transition should be for everybody. But we are saying for it to be just, it needs to be taken into our, we need to be the driver's seat, determine our destination, the rate of speed at which we get to the destination, and quite frankly, which fuel we use to get to the destination, right? So it's important that we need to re-engineer to think of it in terms of the following. Think of livelihood creation, right? So it's not just about job creation, but livelihood creation, especially for informal workers who work downstream in the fossil fuel sector. So your roadside mechanics, right? Your generator repairs, your small-scale charcoal distributors or kerosene sellers. What happens to them, right? And how do you reskill them such that they are able to continue doing business and maintain a source of livelihood, right? Even through the transition, even through the green economy, right? So promoting micro entrepreneurship to drive SME growth, even within the green economy, right? How are you empowering them to be able to take up new jobs, new skills, and support their own selves in this process, right? Then we have to focus on energy sovereignty as a key enabler for industrialization, right? With the closure of the Straits of Hormuz and all of that, we see how it affects a lot of those countries on the other side, right? So the likes of India, other parts of Asia are severely affected. But if you think about it, for those of us down south who are producing the oil and gas, right, it's not that much of a challenge per se. But the reason why it's a challenge is because, of course, oil price has gone up as well. So that affects every other thing. There's a ripple effect on every other thing. That is why we're affected. But imagine if we were fully industrialized in a way that there's a level of self-sufficiency that sort of insulates us from some of these global issues. One of the major hindrances or major issues with this closure is, for instance, fertilizer. There's a very significant amount of fertilizer that flows through that straight, right? And unfortunately, we will not feel the impact now. When it comes harvest season, the prices at the farm gates, that's when we will see the impact of this closure. So we need to find ways to, sort of insulate ourselves in Africa and in Nigeria such that these global issues don't fully or have a significant impact on us, because in reality, we have these resources. We have a lot of these resources. We don't actually have to rely on other countries for them if we focus on our own industrialization. So of course, using domestic natural gas as a transition fuel, which we've talked about, right, which should run parallel to the aggressive deployment of our solar mini grids, for rural electrification, right? And for transition to be just, really, the governance, it cannot be dictated by external metrics that do not match our own local reality. So we need to dictate and determine what are the metrics that work for us, by which we can assess our progress. With this issue of mini grids and rural electrification, one of the reasons why it's so important is because of the rural-urban drift. There's so much pressure on our urban areas because they're seen as the center and the concentration of opportunity. But if we're extending energy access, extending infrastructure development to these other rural areas, then it will reduce the pressure. Why? Because then you develop those areas, right? I'll give an example of a place in South Korea called Ulsan. Ulsan is a town where you have the Daewoo ship manufacturing, ship construction hub. Ulsan, of course, was like a village, right? But it was like a seaside or waterside village. And it's now been developed by Daewoo because of the level of work that is there. Daewoo, Samsung. Now you have universities, you have malls, you have all sorts in that area. Why? Because there's industry there. So it's thriving, it's booming, right? And it's, it contributes significantly to the economy. That's the sort of thing we should be looking at as well. How do we ensure that we're leveraging the space, the interconnectivity, the interconnection, even by road network, train, whatever it is, to ensure that we're spreading development, and then there's less pressure on our cities, on our urban areas. And then, of course, utilizing the, the host communities development trust to ensure that that 3% contribution, right, is actually directed towards community-led economic diversification projects and clean energy. Over to you, Miriam.
Yeah, thank you. You've answered the third question as well, which you've really, which talks about, how to trickle down this transition into, development for us, right? New industries and, etc. Going on. I think one of the challenges, before I go to my last question, would then be that, the key message is that Africa just needs to sit down and each country, Africa as a whole can have a collective position, but also trickling it down to each country and each organization to ask yourself, look, this thing, what's the right strategy for my transition? I've seen some people do transition by 2030 and their country is saying we're transiting by 2060. And I say to myself, you're going to have a big problem. So just being realistic, I think, and that's another one. And that is difficult when there is no data. And that brings me to my last question. I think one of the challenges we're having is that we know the problem. We know that it can be solved, but the how to solve the problem, I think, sits on data. Now we have artificial intelligence that cannot function properly without data. So artificial intelligence is increasing and being cited as a transformative tool for energy planning. So it's a two-way thing. It needs a lot of energy. It's also required for energy planning. You see, it's very useful. Grid optimization, because we want to know what exactly do we need in terms of household, how rich is the data in your organization, in the country, at large. And even as you as an individual, how rich is the data you're using within your own home, We also need it for climate modeling to say, okay, while we're doing this, how are we helping the climate that's, the global warming? But Africa faces significant data infrastructure deficit. So how do we marry this whole problem to be able to, forge ahead in terms of this transition? So that will be my last question for you.
Okay. So you're right. This is a very critical issue because currently we're obviously heavily reliant on what we get, right, from the global north, right? So the risk for us is if we're relying on them for data infrastructure, algorithms, talent, everything, right? We're simply paving the way for a form of digital colonialism, which is dangerous for us, right? So we're losing data sovereignty and ceding it to people who can control it and not necessarily in our best interest. So as a continent, as a country, we need to invest in our own local data collection. We need to be, like co-creators of localized solutions that work for us, right? That also foster our own domestic tech talent, right? That also regulate technology transfer, so that we can then leverage this AI and this technological developments as a means of self-determination, right? And what do I mean by this? So data centers, we need to invest in them, right? Right now, we're heavily reliant on foreign cloud infrastructure and all of that, which puts us at a risk of data capital flight. So we must be investing in data infrastructures and then creating open access energy data sets, right? High quality, so that researchers can then train these models to reflect our own local context. It's very important. Now, talent development, I had mentioned earlier, what are we teaching in our universities, in our polytechnics, in our technical school? What is in their curriculum? So, for instance, engineering. Imagine someone studied electrical engineering in university, right? At a minimum, that course should be taken alongside at least a module in data science. Why? Because it will complement the engineering, learning. Things like that. Are we thinking of those kind of dynamics? What is the match between this and the other? Data science is now pervasive through all sectors, through all industries, through all walks of life. So it's important that we're preparing for the future, right? We're aligning with the trajectory of technology. Otherwise, we'll continue to play catch up and we'll be left behind, right? Then also, when you have like foreign tech companies, coming to operate in Africa or in Nigeria, when I talked about regulation of technology transfer, it must be either legally or contractually enforced as an obligation that they co-develop projects with your universities, your local tech hubs, your polytechnics and all that, to ensure that there's actually technology transfer, right? And then, of course, we must ensure that when we do all of this, we're also creating an enabling environment for tech entrepreneurs to also thrive, to also create new products, and that the operating environment in Nigeria and Africa is conducive for them, so that we're also addressing this talent exodus, this brain drain that is also a challenge to us. If everybody leaves, then you're going to struggle to find the right hands to do these things and to take technology forward. So that's my answer to that question.
So thank you very much. I think over and above this webinar, one of the things that maybe I would like to suggest to Sterling One is that we do a webinar that talks about bringing out the business opportunities in the transition. Because from what we've discussed today, a few people will be able to pick those business opportunities already, from getting storehouses for data centers, talking to, so many things is coming out of this, even in our own understanding. I think that would be a good topic to take this forward, so that people would then understand that even in transition, there's business opportunities that makes it just, that brings inclusiveness as well. And there's also the areas of the transition that can also make it unjust, just like the speaker, the question, the long comments that we got from Mr. Mohammed Saleh as well. So these are areas we need to look at. So we need to, I think that would be a very good topic to put on top of this. And those who are going to be at risk of losing their businesses as we transition, for example, those in the small scale sector of repairing generator, may now begin to ask themselves, are they CSR programs? Are they organizations who are helping train key, artisans in the transition, right? Should, in case there's a big transition in the next 5 years and I lose, my skill becomes obsolete, am I being trained in what's going to be happening in the next 5 years? Conversations like this will be very, very important. I mean, in helping us understand what transition it will mean for us and what we don't want it to mean for us. So thank you, Ejiro. You have expanded our minds. I particularly enjoyed listening to what, Sarah is doing in terms of the wind. That was very interesting to hear, and a couple of other things that's happening. And, and I also thank just Sterling One for bringing up this topic. It's a topic that is wide. That's how Ejiro started. She said this topic is multifaceted. It is large. It's not a topic for 1 hour or 1 hour, 30 minutes. So, but I hope that we've been able to share knowledge to the audience. I don't see any. Were they hands? I didn't see any. Shay, can we still take 1 or 2 questions before we close?
Okay, yes, we can, but they need to drop it in the chat box, just
Chat
like
box.
the one share. Okay, so the only thing is they won't be able to unmute to speak. But if you have questions,
okay.
I see people say they have plenty questions, right?
Okay.
So
and do we have time to take it?
we have like 10 to 15 minutes to take their questions. So please make use of either the Q&A chat box, or you drop your questions in the normal chat box, and so we can take it from there. But I have a question from somebody that dropped it on the Q&A chat box, and he said his name is Ibukun Olaniyan, and he said, could you clarify whether there are any incentives, grants, or support programs available for energy saving initiatives or sustainability aligned projects at work, in the community, or at home? I'm also interested in knowing if any companies or organization, government or private, they are currently funding or providing funding or assistance for energy efficiency or energy transition projects. Ibukun.
Okay.
So that's a question there.
Yeah, Ejiro, you want to take the question, or you want me to? Anyone of us?
I can make some input and then you can
Okay.
add to it. So in terms of grants and funding for I would say green projects or green businesses, yes, there's several. Right? There's several. The question is, how bankable are your projects? Because there needs to be a level of bankability that shows seriousness, that shows impact, that will then allow access to this fund. So, they talk a lot about, there's actually funding for renewable energy, for green projects in Africa, but how much of it really comes to sub-Saharan Africa? And one of the problems is bankability of projects. So yes, there's funding, but what do you plan to do with the funding? How prepared are you to access the funding? So that's my response.
Okay. Thank you. I think on individual basis, I think there are some banks that actually are open to fund your solar panels and all that. If you really do those research, there is a lot going on in the country at the moment for that. With regards to incentive, that's a bit dicey. I know that there's a lot of conversation happening around those kinds of incentive with, uptaking solar. Are there opportunities? There are a few opportunities if you're going to light up some communities. I think there's some business opportunities in some projects going on the government space. That if you're going to light up a community, you can access those projects, and they give you the rundown of the criteria to get those things done. I think what is challenging for most of us is that we really don't believe these things exist. in our country because because of some of the experiences we've had in the past. But I think if we research more, and one of the challenges that, of course, the government has as well is to also make these things very, very, to communicate these initiatives. If you watch NTA, most of us watch other channels. We don't watch NTA. Most of these initiatives are there, really. You will hear a lot of what the government wants you to know about. You necessarily would see that more on the NTA station. So please stay tuned to those stations. I'm sure you'll see many of those. And of course, you can reach out to us privately for the ones that we can expose to you as we can. But then definitely there are those kinds of initiatives. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Marilyn. We have a question from Mina, and it's on economic reality. I think she has about 3 to 4 questions. Wow, about 5. But we'll just take it. And on economic reality, how do we reconcile our ambitious net zero 2060 targets with current fiscal constraints and high cost of capital for renewable projects in Nigeria? So should I take all the questions or we take it one after the other? What's your take, Ms. Ejiro?
I think one by one would be
okay.
better. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So regarding this first question, unfortunately, I'm not in a place to speak for government. This really is a government responsibility. So I'm not in a place to speak for government, but just based on my understanding, right? You are right. There's serious economic constraints in line with our net zero goals. But I think that goals are not necessarily cast in stone, right? You can always go back to the drawing board, look at what is realistic, what is pragmatic, and then find ways to make adjustments, right? That's not necessarily saying, oh, defer or push the net zero goal to 2070 or 2100 or whatever, right? But look at what is realistically achievable between now and then. What needs to go into it, right? Is it going to be important for us to push development in a particular area, a particular sector, in order to raise revenue and all that can be invested in this transition process? Things like that. So you have to go back to the drawing board periodically and say what is realistic, what is achievable. I'll take Sahara for an example. In 2022, we set out our ESG strategy, right? Late last year and into this year, we went back to the drawing board to review it and say, okay, where are we in line with this strategy? What can we do? Does this still work? Is it still realistic when you take into consideration what is going on around the world and the trajectory for energy, all of that? Is it still realistic? Is it still achievable? Are there adjustments that need to be made? We did all of that. So I don't see why Nigeria as a country cannot also do that, right? Also speak to other African countries, see what they're doing, right? See if there are opportunities for collaboration in order to fast track our own goals as well. So I think bottom line, go back to the drawing board and review and say, is our plan still realistic in light of what is going on?
All right, thank you very much for the response. I don't know if Mrs. Marilyn has 1 or 2 to add to that.
No, I'm aligned, absolutely. That's the way. Yeah.
So I'm going to pick another person's question, then come back to Mina's question, some of our other questions, so that it won't just look like we're answering just one person. Okay, so I have another question from, I think she's also the one. And she said, how do we learn from the microcosm of Sahara for Nigeria? I think this goes to Mrs. Ejiro.
Yeah, I think I really just answered that as well. Like,
okay,
if we as a business can go back to the drawing board, review from time to time to say, where are we on this strategy, on these goals, and then revisit, realign, re-strategize, Nigeria can do that as well. And also looking just beyond your immediate environment. Like I said, are you seeking opportunities for collaboration, right? In Sahara, we believe that we're a critical bridge to providing or moving energy to from where it is produced to where it is required, right? What is Nigeria doing to bridge the gap between what it has and where it is needed? right? Even domestically and then, of course, regionally and internationally. We need to be looking at things like that. How do you collaborate with others to achieve your goals? You can't afford to be insular, right? In such when you have very lofty goals. So what are you doing to collaborate? What are you doing to, meet others halfway such that you create mutually beneficial relationships?
All right, thank you very much for the response. I'm not really sure we can take more questions, but I'll just take this one from her, from Bonnet. Nigeria's energy regulatory landscape remains fragmented across NERC, the NMDPB, and now emerging renewable energy agencies, with policy gaps that consistently disadvantage community level and off-grid developers. I believe a specific legislative reform or regulatory harmonization mechanism is critical before Nigeria can credibly attract the scale of transition investment requirements, and who should be held accountable for driving that reform. For example, I think the key players in the oil and gas, banking sector, etc., pick and choose their KPI and run with it with little coordination. So who should make the move, in your opinion?
So I think if the goals you're speaking to have to do with energy transition, right? Who's in charge in the country of things like that, right? That could be the coordinator of these agencies. And I agree with you that there's a need for regulatory harmonization. That's very critical. Oftentimes we develop policy without necessarily thinking of the interdependencies, right, of those policies on other sectors and the import and how it will impact other sectors. So it's important that, yes, there's regulatory harmonization. I also think an area where we need to really bridge the gap is between things like academia and industry realities. One of the things that we're doing in Sahara is we just launched a program called the Asharami MAD equation. MAD simply means making a difference. And what are we trying to do? In this drive for decarbonization, we realize that there are people in universities who have research work that lies dusty in some library or in some, institute and hasn't been taught and hasn't been utilized. And we're saying, you know what? These are the challenges, specific challenges that we have in this sector, right? How do we use your research to achieve these goals? So if you think you have the solution to this thing, apply. Let's see your submission, let's talk, and let's see how we can integrate real solutions into everyday working. So for decarbonization, for improving efficiency, which ultimately would lead to decarbonization, right? Things like that. So I think Nigeria too needs to find ways to leverage our intellectual capital to address some of these issues, right? Rather than just relying on policymakers. Oh, somebody says, where can I apply? I'm interested. You can apply on www.asharamimadequation, one word.com. Asharami Mad Equation. I think I'll type it in the chat box.
Okay, so thank you. What I also would just want to put in here from the conversation that Adrias had, we will realize that identifying opportunity is very important. And in the small space that each organization is, it's no longer doing CSR or doing programs just because it's good to be done. There has to be specific direct impact to people, to the planet, and to your business, your profit as a whole. And if you hear all the conversations she's been having with regards to some of the initiatives, you can actually align those. And that's what the transition is all about, right? Just harnessing those opportunities in the right perspective. A little at a time, and getting there. That's why it's a movement, not a leapfrog. Like I said, no, we're not. That's not going to happen. It's a movement. It's gradual movement. That's why it's called transition. So just to add that to your conversation on that. Thank you. Back to you,
All right.
Shay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will not be able to take further questions. If you still have questions, you can do well by sending us a mail and we'll direct it to the respective speaker to help us provide a response. It's been quite an insightful session from Mrs. Marilyn from PwC, where she took us through the just transition energy. And I think a few things I picked from was where she mentioned that the true measure of successful energy transition is not how quickly we reduce emission, but how we improve the livelihood of people while doing so. She really touched different points where she also told us about the enablers of a just transition. I think she gave us about 4 there. That's financing the transition, inclusion must be central, AI as an enabler, and she talked about policy, finance, technology, and inclusion. Right. I think earlier on we were unable to introduce Madam Ejiro, and I'll do that now. It's my pleasure to have you here today. And Ejiro is the Executive Director of Governance and Sustainability at Sahara Group, and she leads the company ESG and sustainability efforts and has worked on projects focused on energy access, education, and community development. She's also a strong advocate for fair and inclusive energy transition across Africa. I'm sure we can we can testify to that from today's session. All right, so thank you, and we are glad to have you. And
The pleasure is all mine.
Shay, you're muted.
You're mute.
all right, thank you so much. All right, it's good to have you once again. So Mrs. Ejiro took us through the origin. She took us through governance and mandates of Nigeria's energy transition plan. She also mentioned the 5 key sectors that are critical in achieving this energy transmission plan. That she mentioned power, she mentioned oil and gas, she mentioned industry, transport, and cooking. We're going to have this session. This session is recorded. Yes, and you can go back to it on our YouTube channel. Even our previous ESG sessions, we have them on the Sterling One Foundation ESG channel. Thank you so much to our speakers from Madam Marilyn once again, and Madam Ejiro, and the CEO of Sterling One Foundation, Mrs. Olakweju Ibekwe. It's been very interactive. I really enjoyed today's session. I think it's one of the sessions I've enjoyed so far. And thank you very much. It's been very, very interactive and insightful. So as we come to the end of this session, I'd like to appreciate our partners from PwC. They've been from day one we started this session. They've been one of our backbone. Also to LBS, thank you so much. To NECA, thank you so much. To BLab Africa, to NGX and UNIDO IPO, and to our own bank, Sterling Bank. We appreciate you so much. And to everyone who has joined us today, we want to say thank you all for your participation, for your question, for the engagement. And let's also remember that today's conversation, what does it remind us? It reminds us that the energy transition should not happen quickly. It must be fair, it must be inclusive, and it must be beneficial to people and our communities, right? And I think my colleague has already dropped the feedback link. That's the survey link for today's session. Please would appreciate if you can fill it, and this would help us improve our sessions going forward. Thank you once again. Please stay connected with us on our YouTube channel. See you all next time. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.